Happy Mother's Day, friends. We at the Washington, D.C. United Lodge of Theosophists, as do other ULTs in the world, pass on the path to truth and the ancient message of the wisdom of the ages. Teachings as presented in religions of the world have a way of losing their purity through human interpretations, a problem that has also held true for Theosophy. So Robert Crosby restored it to its original lines as it was when transmitted to us by H.B. Blavatsky and our staunch colleague William Q. Judge. Our mission is to make available the message along the lines of what was originally presented. The message of Theosophy in action has always been before us within the laws of nature. HPB showed the path to perfection, but we must assimilate this message into our daily lives. In this regard, the declaration of ULT is, the policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists wherever and however situated. Its similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution nor bylaws nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Today's reading is from the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is speaking. It hath before been declared by me, O sinless one, that in this world there are two modes of devotion, that of those who follow the Sankhya or speculative science, which is the exercise of reason and contemplation, and that of the followers of the Yoga school, which is devotion and the performance of action. A man enjoyeth not freedom from action, from the non-commencement of that which he hath to do, nor doth he obtain happiness from a total abandonment of action. No one ever resteth a moment inactive. every man is involuntarily urged to act by the qualities which spring from nature. He who remains inert, restraining the senses and organs, yet pondering with his heart upon objects of sense, is called a false pietist of bewildered souls. But he who, having subdued all his passions, performeth with his active faculties all the duties of life, unconcerned as to their result, is to be esteemed. Do thou perform the proper actions. Action is superior to inaction. The journey of thy mortal frame cannot be accomplished by inaction. All actions performed other than as sacrifice unto God make the actor bound by action. Abandon then, O son of Kunti, all selfish motives, and in action perform thy duty for him alone. When in ancient times the Lord of creatures had formed mankind, and at the same time appointed his worship, he spoke and said, with this worship pray for increase, and let it be for you, Kamaduk, the cow of plenty, on which ye shall depend for the accomplishment of all your wishes. With this nourish the gods, that the gods may nourish you. Thus mutually nourishing ye shall obtain the highest felicity. The gods, being nourished by worship with sacrifice, will grant you the enjoyment of your wishes. He who enjoyeth that what hath been given unto him by them, and offereth not a portion unto them, is even as a thief. But those who eat not but what is left of the offerings shall be purified of all their transgressions. Those who dress their meat but for themselves eat the bread of sin, being themselves sin incarnate. Beings are nourished by food. Food is produced by rain. Rain comes from sacrifice, and sacrifice is performed by action. Know that action comes from the Supreme Spirit, who is one. Wherefore, the all-pervading Spirit is at all times present in the sacrifice. And now for today's talk, which is on kingdoms of nature.
Welcome, friend. The use of the term kingdom to describe the grand divisions into which all natural objects are classified is common to both ordinary science and theosophy. This word kingdom is somewhat mystic and romantic. So it is kind of surprising that science uses it, and it is kind of contradictory to its nature. But if we asked whether they could give its origin, it is doubtful that they could do so. But Theosophists, looking to this immemorial usage of the word kingdom, finds it echoing the archaic secret doctrine, and some traces of it can be found in the misunderstood religions, the symbolism of the religions, as well as in the nomenclature of science. But in the archaic ages, science and religion were one. It was only when it divided and bifurcated that science lost its touch with the soul of things, and religion became a sort of insoluble mystery. But both bear traces to their divine origin. So it is the purpose of Theosophy to unite them into a whole and a grand synthesis again. But this reunion is not just there to broaden the world's knowledge, but implicit in that is the regeneration of the human race through its moral nature. So this union in science and religion parallels the union of manas with buddhi in men. It is this that is going to redeem the race in the future generations to come. So when we look at the word kingdom, it is probably the earliest form of human government. It is taught in Theosophy that the course of evolution is divided into 4 yugas for each race. And we all know it starts from golden, silver, and then ends with the dark age, which we are at the moment living through, both in Europe, in other words, the West, including United States, and also the East, India particularly. But ordinary learning also refers to these ages, but not knowing the true doctrine regards the golden and silver ages as mythical. However, even the partial recognition of these ages offers proof that there is a primeval, perennial wisdom. And it can be traced in every department of modern learning also. Let us ask then as to what makes a golden age. Well, obviously wisdom and compassion. And what about the black age we are living through? Well, look around, folly and selfishness. And we know that this course of evolution is from spirit to matter. And at the beginning of that cycle, when a spirit is descending into substance, the spiritual qualities is in greater proportion. But as the ages move on, the gradual eclipse of evolution occurs, especially when it is descending towards its nadir. In the beginning of every cycle, when we are living through the golden and silver ages, the wise ones, that is the elder brothers, are there, and they take a direct, active, and leading part in the affairs of the race. But as the cycle proceeds on its descent, on that arc of descent, the wise ones gradually withdraw, and their active presence become factors that are used for good, but behind the scenes. So why is this necessary? Well, the purpose is to make mankind self-reliant and responsible. And in this process, we're all aware that humanity experiences pain, suffering, failure, and great sorrow. These are the accompaniments of the moral nature in Kali Yuga. Now, we want to read from the Secret Doctrine. This particular passage in Volume 2 refers to the divine instructors of humanity. Whether we deal with the Indian rishis or pitris, with the Chinese Chimnang and Changi, their divine men and demigods, and the gods of the ghost world, with the Egyptian Isis, Osiris, and Thoth, with the Hebrew Elohim, or again with Manco Capac and his Peruvian progeny, the story varies nowhere. Every nation has either the 7 and 10 Rishi Manus and Prajapatis, the 7 and 10 Ki, or 10 and 7 Amshashpans, 6 exoterically, 10 and 7 Chaldean anecdotes, 10 and 7 Sephirah, etc., etc. One and all have been derived from the primitive Dayan Chohans of the esoteric doctrine. These in the secret doctrine are the builders of the stanzas. From Manu, Thoth Hermes, Onis Dagon of 7 divine dynasties, who descend from their celestial abode and reign on earth, teaching mankind astronomy, architecture, and all the other sciences that have come down to us. According to Plato, in order to obtain clear and precise ideas on royalty, its origin and power, one has to turn back to the first principles of history and tradition. He tells us that great changes have occurred in days of old, both in heaven and on earth, and the present state of things is one of the results that is due to our karma. Our traditions tell us of many marvels of changes that have taken place in the course of the sun, of Saturn's reign, and of 1,000 other matters that remained scattered about in human memory. But one never hears of the evil which has produced those revolutions, nor of the evil which directly followed them. Yet that evil is the principle one has to talk about to be able to treat of royalty and the origin of power. The evil Plato seems to see in the sameness or consubstantiality of the natures of the rulers and the ruled. For he says that long before men built his cities, that is in the golden age, there was no signs of unhappiness. Everything was happiness. There was no needs that were not met. But why? Because he tells us Saturn, knowing that men could not rule men without injustice filling forth with the universe through his whims and vanity, would not allow any mortal to obtain power over his fellow creatures. To do this, the God used the same means we use ourselves with regard to our flocks. We do not place a block or a ram over our blocks of rams, but give them a leader, a shepherd, that is, someone or a being of a species quite different from their own, and of course with a superior nature. It is just what Saturn did. Now, when we refer to Saturn, we're not just referring to the planet here, we're referring to the spiritual region of that planet, the planetary spirit, in other words. He loved mankind and placed to rule over it no mortal king or prince, but spirits and genii of a divine nature more excellent than that of men. This is from Secret Doctrine, and it is an extended quotation. But if we study it carefully It's on page 365 to 73. This is Secret Doctrine 2. It not only explains the divine government above and its shadowy reflection on earth, but the origin of the pretension of the divine right of mundane kings, the origin of evil, suffering, and want, and the relationship between men and the other kingdoms, in other words, all of the other kingdoms. It also points the way to solve all these problems and to accomplish the return of a golden age, but not just as a recurring cyclic period, but rather as a constant state for a unified humanity. So when masters retired from their active participation in the affairs of men, it was in order that humanity might learn to govern itself. Men imitated his divine rulers, and from among their own number they chose kings. But as a ram or a bullock makes a poor ruler of rams and bullocks, so the purely human kings introduce into their reigns those selfish divisions and special privileges which finally crystallize into the hard and fast castes and classes ever warring upon one another. These rulers, instead of regarding themselves as servants, trustees, and guides of the people, set themselves up as privileged characters and gave themselves powers and possessions which became the means of oppression of the trusting masses in the future generations. The so-called lower kingdoms of nature reacted to this selfishness and disharmony set up, and in place of peace and plenty, there came drought and famine. And if, as is taught in Theosophy, the lower kingdoms progress by natural impulse imparted by men, well, so also is man, checked or not, by the reactions received from these kingdoms. They go, as you know, to make up and support our vehicles. Our embodied existence completely depend upon a proper and harmonious interchange between men and the kingdoms. So, how should we look at these kingdoms? These kingdoms consist of souls in lower degrees of unfoldment, and they, as well as men, are governed and guided by beings of a higher order of life. The differentiation of animal and other lower species began and is carried on by the intelligent aid and interference of these great souls, high and holy men of immense power, knowledge, and wisdom. So various names have been given to these beings, such as creators, guides, great spirits, dhyanis, and we can all look in the Secret Doctrine and we will come across these names. The great beings are the kings, having in charge, of course, the evolution and welfare of those souls who have not yet reached the stage of conscious self-direction. And of course, we refer to these kingdoms as the lower kingdoms. Mankind, as we know, takes part in this work. But whereas the work of these great spirits is always of a beneficent and progressive nature, that of men is mixed, being often a downward and destructive character. On page 373 of the Secret Doctrine, this statement is there. Fruits and grain, unknown to earth to that day, were brought by the Lords of Wisdom for the benefit of those they ruled from other lokas or spheres. May not the reverse of this be also true, and the withdrawal of the Lords of Wisdom, if not totally kind of cutting off the magnetic connection between them and ourselves, at least is broken or weakened, so the life-sustaining power of these fruits and grains perhaps become greatly diminished. And if we carry this a step further, may not man's abuse of nature and his inhumanity to his own kind result in a stoppage or a lessening of natural production and fertility? We all know that here, especially in the West, some diabolical actions took place, and tons of foodstuffs were destroyed, tons of it, just to keep the prices up. And the farmers still destroy their products in large quantities. And of course, this is in the face of a pitiful cry that can be heard in all four quarters of our earth, because there is tremendous poverty and need for food. For a long time, it is stated that the remnants of the fourth root race in China and elsewhere, including the early sub-races of the fifth root race, have been visited by famine, drought, floods, and great privation, want. Perhaps can we not say that this karmic result is the end effect of that destruction described, which is practiced mostly in the West? One of the most persistent and distressing problems with this race of ours is that it has been afflicted in the historical period, especially with problems of poverty. And in our writings, this historical period kind of extends all the way roughly to the inauguration of Kali Yuga, which was about 5,000 years ago. What did Krishna give us? Well, he certainly gave us the Bhagavad Gita as a guide through these dark ages, because it treats all these problems in that book. But it also suggests its cure. And we just read earlier that the cause of improper action, that is an action with an eye to the fruit or the end result, results in our demise, but its cure is also suggested, which is action as a sacrifice to the Supreme Spirit. And we will read this statement again. When in ancient times the Lord of creatures had formed mankind and at the same time appointed his worship, he spoke and said, "With this worship pray for increase, and let it be for you, Kabaduk, the cup of plenty on which you shall depend for the accomplishment of all your wishes. With this nourish the gods, that the gods may nourish you, thus mutually nourishing, ye shall obtain the highest felicity. The gods, being nourished by worship with sacrifice, will grant you the enjoyment of your wishes. He who enjoyeth what hath been given unto him by them, and offereth not a portion unto them, is even as a thief. But those who eat not but what is left of the offerings shall be purified of all their transgressions. Those who dress their meat but for themselves eat the bread of sin, being themselves sin incarnate. Beings are nourished by food. Food is produced by rain. Rain comes from sacrifice, and sacrifice is performed by action. Know that action comes from the Supreme Spirit, who is one. Wherefore, the all-pervading Spirit is at all times present in the sacrifice. We'll follow this by Mr. Judge's comments in his notes to the Bhagavad Gita, and these statements are truly illuminating. It is not contended by either Brahmins or their followers that food will not be produced except from sacrifice performed according to Vedic ritual, but that right food, and I say it again, right food, productive in the physical organism of the proper condition, enabling man to live up to his highest possibilities alone, is produced in that age where the real sacrifices are properly performed. In other places and ages, food is definitely produced, but it does not in everything come up to the required standard. In this age, we have to submit to these difficulties and can overcome them by following Krishna's instructions as given in this book. In other words, our actions are to be performed as sacrifice to the Supreme Spirit. So, a tainted motive results then in precipitation of wrong action, and this is on the planes of thought, word, and deed. The taint of selfish and personal motive then poisons the hidden springs of nature. Mankind feels this reaction in sickness, pain, and premature death. The purification of motive will sweeten these hidden springs, and so that the great burden of disease, want, and fear will fall away, as darkness does at the end of the night when dawn approaches. The understanding and application of Krishna's instructions on the right performance of action will solve every problem that we're experiencing. Let us remember that we're dealing with life and living beings in all our movements and relationships, and that these gods or elemental souls cannot prosper unless we nourish them as they do us. We stir them when we monopolize the planet on which we all live and move and have our being while incarnated. Just as interference with free circulation of the blood causes sickness, atrophy, and death, so then men's selfish interference with the free and the reciprocal circulation of life and the lives among all the kingdoms of nature with humanity is the cause of sickness and atrophy of nature. This condition cannot be cured by applying remedies to the surface, but only by us re-establishing once again a normal and unimpeding interchange of all living units. And when we move it forward to today, what we have read today is more applicable perhaps than it was in the past, because as you can see all around the world, how man is suffering from want, from sickness, and we're still not accepting our tainted purposes in blocking these unselfish and hidden springs that nourish us. We need to reestablish this connection to all of nature, because as we just said, these are souls. All these lower kingdoms are souls. They're in evolution, and in a future manvantara we are told they're going to be future men. This individualization then comes to a point in the animal kingdom, and they are the first ones that will incarnate in the next cycle as men. But all the other kingdoms also work towards that goal, that it is our duty to impart to them unselfish impetus in order that they can move on their journey towards a higher expression of themselves. When we achieve in correcting our mistaken notions about how nature functions, then humanity will be on the road to recovery.